Morning, everybody. Morning. Lovely to be here. I'm just going to take a moment to set this up. So this topic here that I'm jumping into today, it's been creating this talk has been a little bit of it's been a process for me because I had a download that I was supposed to organize this body of information for part of my general teaching practice. And it kind of came in like a flash. And this happened to me once before when I started running a yoga teacher training, where it was a flash, and then the next 5 years was creating and running the program. And the same thing happened with this. Mother's Trust Ashram, some of you might be familiar with it. It's on the west side of Michigan, and I've been involved with them for a while. And the temple had been shut down for various reasons, one of them including COVID. And I went back for the first time, and I got this thing came into me about universality, spirituality, and the framing of Bhakti Yoga. So I'm also in All Faith Seminary right now, and I'm trying to kind of wrap all of my work around sharing these ideas. So I created this slideshow, and when I did it, I think I deleted about half of it this morning. I didn't delete it. I saved it because I'm creating a bigger thing. So we're going to jump into this, and I want to try to keep it simple, but I'm just kind of giving you guys all a little bit of context of what I'm showing up with in this moment. So I'm assuming that most of you have at least heard the term Bhakti Yoga, and Bhakti means devotion, and yoga is the path of mystical union. So within the Indian context, there are many different ways that bhakti is expressed and shared. So the more liberal-minded teachers think that this is not only about the Indian language or the Indian subcontinent, but that this is the universality of spirituality across the board. So as we know, we all want love, joy, peace, happiness, connection. We want it inside of ourselves, and we want it with others. So Swedish Chef came to my mind. Everybody wants the recipe to happiness, So we're all, and everyone, there's lots of people who offer us recipes for happiness. And these recipes, they work. They often bring happiness to many of us. Oh, a blank slide? So yeah, often there's lots of religious teachings and spiritual, psychological teachings, and they're all pointing us towards that happiness. A quote from Swami Bhashyananda, who was the one who started all of the ashrams in Ganges, Michigan. This comes from his book, "All Spiritual Traditions Are Merely Different Vehicles for Attaining God." And he continues, "The different spiritual traditions in the world should not be viewed as competitive, but rather as complementary. They're like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. All are needed to complete the spiritual picture." And then I put, "of humanity." So when I thought about this quote, it's all of this stuff is occurring. It's all happened. All of these spiritual expressions, all of these teachers who are sharing their perspective on wisdom. And that's the story of humanity that we're all in. Second here, there we go. So another framing of things that I really like from Swami Bhashyananda's work is the religious traditions are made of essential qualities and non-essential qualities. So essential qualities are bliss, love, joy, unity, reverence, unselfishness, or we could say selflessness, all of those positive attributes that we're trying to create in ourselves. The non-essentials, which we find in all religious traditions and in a lot of social, political, all of the teachings. The non-essential are specific rituals, so when we get really hung up on the ritual, not that we should get rid of the ritual, but it's not necessarily essential to get to that love. Cultural myths, which are a very important part of human life, human experience, they're there, but my myth doesn't need to be better than your myth. Divisive rhetoric, external appearances. So often in a lot of the world's wisdom traditions, we'll see specific clothing, things like that. Those things are great, and they should be celebrated for people who want to use them. It helps deepen their faith in their own tradition. But it's not essential. It's not essential to that unending love light that is available for all of us. So, really simply stated, essentials help us transcend our ego consciousness, where non-essentials can lead to grasping to ego identification. Now, the non-essentials can also be in a healthy mode. The non-essentials could be healthy or unhealthy. They could take either form. The essential and all of the great teachings, world teachings, will help us get over our limited ego-clinging patheticness. Not that it has to always be bad, but... So Sri Ramakrishna says every religion is a valid path to spiritual fulfillment. Very broad-minded view. He also says the best path for union with God is to follow the way of divine love as taught by Narada. So now this could seem a little bit conflicting. Like on one he says, all of them are great, but then he's saying that this is the best. So the thing that I find interesting about this is Sage Narada's teachings. He wrote the sutra, the Bhakti Sutras, which are aphorisms. You could say they're short, concise statements in the Sanskrit language that are explaining this universal experience of love for God and the devotional path. So when Sri Ramakrishna is saying that all religious paths are effective, and when he says that the way of the Bhakti Sutras are the best path, my belief is he's actually just saying the Bhakti Sutras is kind of what's going on. It's within all of these paths. You can see it within all of these paths. So it's not claiming the supremacy of Bhakti Yoga. It's saying that this is something that's naturally occurring for humans. Swami Shivananda, a little quote here I liked. The practice of bhakti and the attainment of liberation are not restricted by any consideration of caste, creed, color, sex, or country. Every human being who has faith, emotion, and aspiration can cultivate bhakti and attain God realization through bhakti. So this is also a very broad-minded. Now he says creed, color. I want to make contemporary jokes, but nothing's quite coming. Sex, country. So he's kind of trying to cover it all. Everyone, as long as you have emotion. I put emotion in italics because the devotional path, we're trying to take our turmoil, all of our negative emotions, and use that emotion to transform it into a more sublime experience, a more blissful experience. So it's refining our emotional experience. It's not running away from our emotional experience. Some people would say that we're all trying to do devotional practices, but we're either conscious or unconscious of it. That's a big topic in and of itself. Excuse me. So I'm assuming that as I jump here into the Bhakti Sutras, that you will all see that it somehow relates to what you're already up to, what you're already doing. Like I'm saying, these things are occurring. It's just explaining what humans tend to do. So as I go in a little bit deeper, I want you all to think about, oh yeah, that kind of explains me. That kind of like points to the path I'm already on. First, we're going to go into the second and third sutras. Bhakti is the supreme form of pure love. So devotional practice is the form of pure love. So with these sutra studies, it really gets into the Sanskrit language and the power of the Sanskrit language and the meaning. So para, as we could say in English, para, is like the ultimate, supreme. Like when they refer to the goddess, they'll say para Shakti, the great Shakti, like the most amazing. Ooh. Someone's doing that, and it's not me. The form of, so rupa, it means the form, the essence, and then pure love. So bhakti, our devotional practice, when we're in that state of practicing love for God, we're actually in the essence of pure love itself. So it's pointing to this thing that the practice of loving God is non-different than God itself. The essential nature of bhakti is the divine nectar of immortality. So now I could probably do like 30 minutes on just each one of these sutras, but when we're talking about the essential nature is the swarupa, the divine form of bhakti and immortality. So in the yoga system, they talk about this amrita. And it's not really, like some people think it actually is your physical body, but generally it's the state of feeling that you are immortal consciousness, that you are not your death and your birth, you are beyond that. So the basic essence of this bhakti is pointing towards this experience where you feel that you are unlimited vastness. You are all time and space. You are endless time and space. So this is the essence of Bhakti Yoga here, that it's supreme love, which is non-different than the love for God itself is non-different than God itself, and that is the nature of the unconditioned experience. So within the Bhakti Yoga tradition, we have different modes of bhakti. So this is a lot of Sanskrit. So if we just look on the second parts of it, but Ishta Devata, so this is when you have like a form of God you love. I'm sure that one of you probably has a relationship with Jesus in the room, since we're here in Western culture. So Jesus is a form of God. So in the Sanskrit language, we would say that's Ishta Devata, your chosen form of divinity. So in Indian culture, we'll find that people have different forms. They'll love Krishna or Divine Mother, Ram, the list goes on and on. So Atma Bhakti is devotion to one's indwelling soul. So this is more of an internal experience of communing with the soul. Ishvara Bhakti is devotion to God as formless consciousness. So it's not so much about a personification of God, like Jesus is a personification. It's more like, I feel like God is all-pervasive, omnipresent, formless. And then the more controversial one, which we could talk about a lot, which is Guru Bhakti, which is devotion to the teacher, which would include nature. So nature would be included as one of the primary gurus, teachers. So these are prominent modes of bhakti, of devotion, of love that people are engaged in. So maybe one of these you relate to. So for me, I have a little bit of the thing for Jesus. I also love Divine Mother. So those are forms that I feel this resonance with. But then ultimately I feel this omnipresent spaciousness that I feel is God. So I'm a little bit on the path of Ishta Devata Bhakti and Atma Bhakti and Ishvara Bhakti. Guru Bhakti is a little complicated for me. And for many Westerners it is. But it's very natural in Asian culture. So if we look at Christianity, or we could say Catholicism, and I put them in as two different things to respect my Catholic friends out there. My aunt's a Catholic, and she's like, we're not Christian, we're Catholic. So Jesus is the form of God, right? So that's Ishta Devata and Saguna Bhakti. These are a lot of terms, and I don't want to overwhelm people with terms, but like I said, I'm kind of processing through this, so thank you for letting me do that here. So Saguna Bhakti means God with form, devotion to a form of God. And then if you think about all the saints in the various Christian traditions, particularly in Catholicism, that's another form. So if you're really into like St. Francis or any of the various saints and you do prayers and meditate on them, that's meditation on God with a form, which is also could be considered Guru Bhakti. The saint could be considered the guru, the great teacher. Daily prayer, singing, praise groups. We did a little bit of that here this morning. As most of you know, I'm into kirtan, which I always kind of think of kirtan as a practice for weirdos and freaks. We like to sit there and just say the same thing over and over again until you kind of, until you have an experience. You're going for it. Really stirring the pot of devotion. And kirtan is it can be an extreme practice. You sit down and you'll chant for 2 hours. You'll chant for 5 hours. You sit and you go for it until you shift, kind of almost like a sweat lodge. And in yoga, they call that tapasya, taking on an austerity to have a spiritual experience. So we've got daily devotion, Bible study. It's what we call swadhyaya in the Sanskrit, in the Bhakti tradition. And then rosaries in the Catholicism is very similar to the prayer beads that are used in the chanting of Sanskrit mantras as well. So we can see there's a lot of similarities with the Christian Catholicism and with the Hindu tradition of Bhakti Yoga. I had a cold a few weeks ago, so still a little lingering. In the New Testament, rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Such a beautiful teaching. And that's really the essence of Bhakti Yoga. When do your mantra all of the time. Continually sing the name of God. Always remember to chant. No matter what's going on, keep the mantra going. Rejoice always. Always look at the gratitude song Mary just did. Is very much so connected to that. Devote yourself to prayer with an alert mind and thankful heart. So this is another statement of bhakti. And worship the Lord your God and serve him only. So that's putting God on your heart and in your mind. This is completely no different than what we see in the Bhakti Yoga tradition. Same truth. In the Torah, or we could say the Old Testament, I really enjoy this section here. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, and when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Tie them as a symbol on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your household and on your gates. So, for some of you who are familiar with Judaism, you can see some of the literal aspects of prayer in more Orthodox Judaism, tying things to your arms, putting them on your head, on your doorframes. I really like talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along on the road, when you lay down, and when you get up. So it's basically a poetic way of saying, think about it all of the time. Always be thinking about God. Always be contemplating God. So in Islam and Judaism, not to just group them together quickly, but for brevity, they both tend towards more of a formless God, which we could call nirguna, without form, bhakti. So devotion to a God that is formless. There's within especially Orthodox communities, specific times of prayer, which in the Sanskrit language we would call daily sadhana, specific disciplines around practice. We have religious clothing, non-essential but very helpful for people who are on that path to help them stay focused on their tradition. Pilgrimages, and as you all know, Mecca and Jerusalem are big pilgrimage places for Islam and Judaism. And in Sanskrit, we call pilgrimages yatras or tirthas. And then, we could talk for days about all of the pilgrimage sites in the Hindu tradition, because everything is sacred, right? So, you go to the river and there's temples everywhere, and the mountain, there's like a kind of endless opportunities to go on pilgrimage. There's actually a campaign in India now called Toilets Not Temples, to focus on basic hygiene more instead of the cosmic. Amma, the hugging guru, she's involved with that campaign. Sadhguru, who's a very prominent guru now. There are a lot of big players that are really like, we need more toilets. So, if anyone's been to India, you would know what I mean. So, these are some quotes from the Bhakti Sutras. And I really liked these first two. Characteristics of bhakti are variously described as owning to differences in opinion. Specifically, different teachers view bhakti differently. So here we have a call for religious tolerance in the Bhakti Sutras. So they're not saying my way or the highway, this is the only way. They're saying this can be quite open. Now, this Sutra 34 gives a little bit of important framing. I put the word acharya. The acharya, or teacher, have sung the means of practicing bhakti. So an acharya is a teacher who is fully embodied in the practice that they're teaching. So they're not just a scholar, they're not just somebody who's got some status because of an organization, they're a living embodiment. So it's interesting because it's saying, all these teachers have taught bhakti in different ways, but then they're also saying the teacher needs to be qualified. Like, it can't just be like Joe Schmo. It needs to be somebody who's really living a powerful example. So then we're going to go through a list of ways that bhakti is practiced. Bhakti can be attained. So bhakti is both a practice and a state of consciousness, right? So supreme bhakti is when you feel that you are one with the Lord. Now, people phrase that differently, but yeah. So bhakti can be attained through uninterrupted loving service and worship of the Lord. So I am going to get my baby some food. I am serving God. I am giving a talk. I am serving all of you as a living embodiment of God right here, right now. You guys listening to me are serving me back as a living embodiment of God. It's a back and forth. So the loving service and then the worship. So the worship can take many forms. Informal, the reading that was given earlier. Informal is very popular these days. But it could also be a formal form of worship. According to sage Vyasa, Vyasa is the author of the Bhagavad Gita and all of the Vedas, bhakti is attachment to worship and the like. So this is getting a little bit more specific about people who are really into externalized rituals. And I would say, and my contemporary hippie friends, people like to make their own little altars and do their own candle lighting and have their own pictures. It's a form of ritualistic worship. It's a form of bhakti. According to Acharya Garga, devotion and attachment to stories about God and the like is bhakti. So now this does kind of particularly point to Lord Krishna when it says the pastimes of the Lord and his devotees. It's talking about the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is a specific text. But you could also, from a liberal translation of it, you could say, the Bible is the stories, or whatever religious text is telling the story about a religious figure and the people who hung out with that religious figure. So loving those and getting into those can help us get bhakti. According to sage Shandilya, bhakti is constantly enjoying the self, your soul, without any hindrance. So this one resonates deeply with me, and I'm assuming a few of you, feeling that connection to God, dwelling on, meditating on that. So here we're going not so much into the form of God, we're going back to a formless God. Sage Narada indeed believes, and Sage Narada is the author, so he's talking about himself. Sage Narada indeed believes that bhakti is dedicating all actions to the Lord, and that forgetting the Lord causes extreme misery and anguish. So dedicating all actions to God. So anything you do, you're not attached to the outcome, and you do it as an offering to the divine. All actions. And the second part, forgetting the Lord causes extreme misery and anguish. So that's the thing of not feeling connected to that inner love light. When we're caught up in our ego drama, that's anguish. So this is Narada's view, though. And as we can see, we don't necessarily have to focus on this one. We could be focusing more on doing ritual worship. So even while engaged in ordinary activities, bhakti is attained by listening to and singing God's attributes and glories. So these are probably somewhat familiar characters to most of you, but we have Baba Ramdas on one side, Krishna Das on the other, and their guru, Neem Karoli Baba. And all of these gentlemen liked to chant. They liked to do kirtan. So singing God's attributes and glories. So when you chant Hare Krishna, singing God's name. So this verse is saying, sing. Sing. The primary means of attaining bhakti is through the grace of great souls or through a little grace of the divine. So that brought to mind the Sacred Heart of Jesus and this emanating compassion that we all can tune the channel to catch that wave. And through that divine grace alone, that state of bhakti can be had, which I find to be a very profound statement. And I'm sure many of you have experienced those little rays of divine grace, just very merciful that is out there. And just because I like this picture, I had to choose between the two pictures, and it's a nice picture of Jesus. You taught yourself the most unnatural habit of not communicating with your Creator. Yet you remain in close communication with Him. Unlearn isolation through His loving guidance and learn of all the happy communication that you have thrown away, but not lose. So from the Course of Miracles. it's a beautiful thing. I feel like I don't even need to say anything. It speaks for itself. But that communication with God is there, and we need to just remember it. So I was doing this, and I know that there's a number of people here that like the Course of Miracles. So I prayed, and I opened the Course of Miracles, and this is what I got to. And then the other one I got, God is but love, and therefore so am I. There's a whole section. It goes through many pages, and it repeats this theme. God is but love, and therefore so am I. So this is the statement of the non-difference of God and the devotee, which we see in Bhakti. So our love for God, our devotion to God, is the love of God. God is but love, and therefore so am I. It's beautiful. So with all of this, I've kind of, rushed through all these points after cutting half of this out, Self-inquiry, so, each one of you, you're all here, so you're all on the spiritual path, right? And I feel like it's empowering to sometimes identify, what am I into? Oh, wow, I've had this relationship with a formless God. I practice self-inquiry and contemplation, and I study the sacred texts. I study the Course of Miracles. I read the Bible daily, the Bhagavad Gita, whatever it might be. Meditation and communing with the inner light and inner self. I have that on there because that's a method of, we concentrate, we feel that peace within, meditating on that peace that's covered by all of the hecticness. So I just wanted to invite you all to contemplate those things and to see how this Bhakti Yoga, this concept of Bhakti Yoga and this concept of universality, it's not really a concept. I would say it's actually the reality that we're all living. We're all in this dance of trying to be in connection with the sacred that is already there in our own life. So I was picking out some pictures on the internet, and I like this because you have all these people that have a lot of the non-essentials, turbans and bindus and various religious clothings, and the non-essentials of our external appearances, our skin color, things like that, those non-essential. But yet we can all join together in a harmonious way and support and celebrate each other on our own unique paths of our devotional practices. And with that, have I gone over time? Probably. Thank you, everyone.